we just talked about big data, including several principles of data model design. This part is called conceptual design. It mainly happens when we define the database at the beginning. How does the database define its model, including how to define the relationship between data? We should ideally be able to illustrate these relationships, draw it out in a diagram. That is the relationship between tables, including the correspondence between business and data. If we can draw a complete diagram, a bird's eye view, our understanding of the data will be deeper. With the data model, we can better develop and utilize data. In this process, there is another important task, which is data auditing. Data auditing is actually to ensure the value of data, for example, the authenticity of data, integrity, if the data we analyze has problems or is not genuine data or is erroneous data, it is meaningless. Of course, data auditing is not just about integrity or authenticity is the value of data. We should first identify the information needs. As we mentioned before, a large amount of data is stored in a space. This data, we initially called it a data lake, which contains all kinds of data. So we need to clean the data to form that data warehouse. In this process, it is also to determine the information needs. If there is no necessary data, we will remove it. And in terms of organizational relationships, we need to map it into an information flow. That is the relationship between data processing and business processing. To achieve a mapping, this part is actually the process of data governance. How to make data generate greater value, how to maximize the value of data. Data security is just a part of data governance because data security is a part of data management. So our data auditing, strictly speaking, is a part of the entire data management work. In this process, we also mentioned earlier, one is to enhance capabilities. That is, we should enhance the value of data. So from an auditing perspective, if a piece of data has no value or meaning for my business data, it has no meaning for the development of my business. Then I occupy space or I consume computing power and resources to maintain the data. There is no logic in this. The second one is to avoid data leakage and to avoid the loss of data integrity. So while ensuring the value of data, we also need to consider how to protect the security of the data, including data integrity. So this work is also very important. This is the benefit of data auditing. In addition, it increases risk management capabilities. Our protection of data is this capability, including the overall system upgrade. In this process, of course, in the process of big data processing, the underlying networks, whether their security or confidentiality can be protected, including the availability of our database, whether the data is backed up, whether the recovery tools are appropriate, all these need to be considered globally. What should we pay attention to in the process of data access, sharing, and dissemination? Let's take a look. The first is the issue of data ownership, whether it's our data processing or data archiving, including data exchange. Who is the owner? This needs to be clearly defined in the entire data processing process. Who is ultimately responsible for the data, or who is the owner of the data? In addition, there are also the needs of various stakeholders, because different stakeholders have different requirements for data management. For example, some users may think that the convenience of using data is the most important. From a security perspective, the 3 characteristics of data may be the most important. From the owner's perspective, my control of the data is the most important. From an operation and maintenance perspective, how can I facilitate operation and maintenance? How to make the data generate greater value? The logic is different. So in the process of data auditing, we also need to consider the needs and interests of stakeholders in all aspects and directions. In addition, there is one more thing. When we collect data, what is the range of privacy that can be made public or used? We need to think clearly when using customer data, because including our country's data security law, including personal information protection law, we need to consider these risks clearly. But if you say I don't use personal privacy, It may be for the business, its ability and level of data value cannot be reflected. There is also a cost. You do all things will invest corresponding costs. So the relationship between cost and data value also needs to be considered. If the cost of what we do far exceeds the value of data, from an auditing perspective, there is a problem. In this, there is another one, that is metadata. We mentioned before that metadata is data that describes data attributes, including data relationships. The association between data is through metadata. So the mining of metadata or the operation of data through metadata is a very important part. But on the other hand, the use of metadata now also includes some legal responsibilities. For example, our country's data security law explicitly points out that metadata also needs to be graded and classified. Otherwise, through a large amount of use of this metadata, our data mining may reveal privacy. By using a large amount of this raw data, our data mining may potentially reveal privacy, including some obviously sensitive data. Another issue in the process of data storage and transmission is jurisdiction. The law of the jurisdiction is the first risk we need to consider. No matter where it is stored, or it may pass through a certain place during my transmission. The local law is very important. For example, some countries in the world, they do not allow data encryption, whether it's storage or transmission. But this, for example, is related to PCI-DSS. And our card payment business, for example, cat head payment. It clearly states in its PCI-DSS that I need to protect cardholder data during transmission. So does this create a conflict? Some people might say that we should respect industry standards first. Actually, no. If your data flows through these countries that do not allow encryption, this is a requirement of the local law or judiciary, so we have to take a detour and possibly go another way. This data cannot flow through these countries to ensure the standards of the industry such as PCI-DSS. So sometimes we have to make choices. There's another thing, it's about data version control. Because after data processing, the state of the data will change. So we need to maintain the version of this data. After each data processing, it reflects the latest data, including what the data relationship is. These all need version control. Otherwise, data can easily become confused, causing a loss of integrity. In the end, we question the authenticity of the data. We start to doubt in the whole process of access, sharing, and dissemination. Of course, the data owner, he is the ultimate responsible person. So about the owner's rights, we've talked about it before. One is classification. One includes defining the role of data delegation. Who can use this data? Who maintains it? Who is responsible for its security? In addition, one is the owner, one is the regulator. These two personnel negotiate or discuss, then decide whether the data is available for use. One is from the perspective of data value, one is from the perspective of data security, including some legal compliance aspects. They define the authorization relationship. It's not that all people or anyone can access the data. This is very important. So this is the process of transmission and use. Finally, there is the process of data publication. The publication of data is like this. For example, some public data we can publish, including some data that may have passed its confidentiality period. We can also publish the historical truth. I recommend a TV show called Dust. It was on the Central Long channel before. It should have been talked about on the documentary channel. It talks about a lot of military intelligence during World War II. After so many years, after half a century, it was declassified. Can some data be opened? Because the confidentiality period has passed, including this between the US and Japan on Okinawa Island, including some details of China's Pacific War. Now we can open it to restore history. So the publication of data also needs a considerable amount of time. Including compliance requirements, some data can be published, while some data, once it has passed the data life cycle, it involves a process of data damage. The data should be safely destroyed. But there is a problem here. We generally think that deleting data is okay. Actually, it's not, because the place where the data is deleted especially magnetic information, it has residual magnetism. For example, we use what? Like this HDD's rescan, including recovery. We can resume this data. So if we recover this data, then scan from the residual magnetism, then this data can be found. Many of us have used such software. This is actually not safe. Deleting data is not safe. Some people will say, teacher qui, I now use shift plus DL to delete data. This also has a problem because what we delete is actually the index of the data or the file of the data, file name, but the overall data information on the disk is still there. So there is a second type of treatment called clearing. The so-called clearing is what we call overwriting. I use a large block of data to cover the data we deleted before. This is overwriting. But overwriting has a problem. It's hard for us to guarantee that the new data I write can completely cover the old data because sometimes that data, it has data fragments. It's not completely covered. Another thing is that some research institutions, they have done similar laboratory tests, that is within 7 or 9 overwrites. Of course, the test conditions are different. Data still has the possibility of restoration. So the number of overwrites is very important. For example, some companies may outsource data scrap, find a pacifying company to deal with. So in the contract, we need to clearly define the number of overwrites. Of course, the hard disk can still be used after overwriting because what you cover is just data, but the capacity of the hard disk itself can still be used. This is the second treatment method. The third treatment method is called eradication. Eradication is actually filling with 01. Use 01 to cover all sectors in the hard disk, all tracks, all partitions, fill them all with 01. It feels a bit like the low-level formatting we used before. Low format. If you bought a computer in the early days, at that time, the hard disk was relatively small. It could be a few GB or tens of GB. We usually format the hard drive in DOS using the low-level format method. In this way, all the capacity of the hard drive is read out, then it is filled with 1010. Basically, the data cannot be restored. After being filled with 01, the data cannot be restored, so this is relatively safe. Of course, the safest way is to destroy the data, that is, physically destroy my hard drive. I destroy it. There are many ways to destroy it. As we mentioned earlier, to clear it, clearing means overwriting it, but under certain conditions or circumstances, it can still be recovered. In terms of eradicating, it is the filling of show 1. It is impossible to rebuild the data. Let's look at destruction. Because when it comes to destruction, it is related to the storage medium we mentioned. However, no matter what method of destruction you use, destruction is the safest way to prevent data from being read again because there is no hardware left. For example, what can be used? This can be used, as we mentioned earlier, in the entire data. Overwriting can be used in the process of destruction, including encryption. We will talk about encryption later. There is also demagnetization. In fact, there is a method called demagnetization in destruction using a demagnetizer. We put the hard drive in the demagnetizer. In fact, it is equivalent to damaging the physical function of the hard drive. Put it in a large box like a drawer. Then, it is a large black box device. Then there is a loud noise. The magnetic information of the disk is gone. It is equivalent to the hard drive without magnetic information. So it is equivalent to no storage space. So demagnetization is a physical destruction. In addition to demagnetization, there is also a physical destruction called phase change. In terms of phase change, this process is quite complicated. It uses a physical solution. That is, we raise the temperature to the Curie temperature. In this way, no matter what state the substance is in, it becomes gaseous, then the substance disappears, the entire hard drive is gone, then the data is definitely gone. The Curie temperature is about 1800, I can't remember the specifics, it should be over 1800 degrees. It seems to be over 1830. At this temperature, all substances become gaseous. Another very important point is SSD. The solid-state drives we use now, solid-state drives and the storage of these disks, they are different. For solid-state drives, I once watched a documentary. It talks about why such a small device can store such a large space. In fact, It uses an ion encapsulation technology. It is different from the traditional magnetic disk storage. Magnetic disk storage stores magnetic information. So if you use demagnetization to destroy the solid state drive, it's not quite right. What should we do for the destruction of solid state drives? It is generally like this. That is, the manufacturer of the solid state drive in the read-only memory of the solid state drive, or in this controller, there are commands to erase hard drive data. We can find this hard drive program by entering the BIOS in the CMOS when booting. So what is this built-in clear command? For this solid state drive, to do data encryption, full disk encryption, it is equivalent to encrypting the data directly under the common mode of this BIOS in the host CMOS BIOS. I directly encrypt the data. In the process of encryption, its key is dynamically generated. It will generate a random number. We will talk about how to use this encryption algorithm in chapter 3. After encryption, even if my data is still stored in the SSD, we may still be able to find this data, but it is encrypted. And after he is encrypted, the hard drive will automatically restart, causing the key formed in the memory to disappear automatically with the restart. That is, no one can obtain or capture this key, so the data can never be restored. So in this way, it is equivalent to destroying the data in the hard drive very quickly. And the efficiency is very high and its security is guaranteed. In essence, it is to fragment the data. That is, your data is encrypted. If you restore it, it is also encrypted. So this is the method of SSD destruction. Speaking of this, we can see that destruction and destruction are the highest level of security. Then there is demagnetization and eradication. That is, we said 0-1 filling, including demagnetization. Because not all hard drives can use demagnetization, then there is what we call overwriting, also called elimination. The worst is erasure or deletion. It is almost insecure. You can recover it. This is from the perspective of media processing, its level of demand. Of course, the higher the level of our data, the higher the method of destruction we should use. Finally, there is a problem with the residue of cloud data. This is the hardest because of two problems. We mentioned before that for cloud data, the owner actually lost control. We will think that the owner or uploader of the data, he can destroy the data. In fact, let's just think about whether the cloud provider has a mirror image of the data. We don't know. Another one is where the data is stored. Whether it has been completely cleared, we don't know, because it may be distributed or grid storage. The data may be many fragments scattered everywhere. Where is he? It's hard to say. Therefore, dealing with the residue of cloud data is quite difficult. There are three common solutions in the industry. The first one is also the safest. That is, I do it locally. I encrypt it locally. That is, encrypting locally before uploading. Because in this way, this logic is easy for everyone to understand. It's like when I upload to the cloud, I encrypt it on my new system locally. In this way, even if my data in the cloud is leaked or I didn't destroy it, then others can't see it, right? It just takes up some space. But there is a problem. For services based on SaaS cloud, the data you upload to the cloud is already encrypted. Then I can't implement many businesses. For example, like Kingsoft Office, you can't read this file at all because it is encrypted, right? So its biggest problem, it may lose, it just uses the cloud as a network disk. Many functions or businesses on the cloud cannot be implemented. So what can be done for the second one? We can use CASB. CASB is called Cloud Access Security Broker or Gateway. That is, the moment I upload to the cloud from my data from local to the cloud, after transmission, the moment it reaches the cloud security function encrypts it for me, automatically encrypted. That is, the data I uploaded to the cloud, it has become encrypted. So this is the security function of the cloud's proxy boundary. It also has problems. Although many cloud providers claim that this encryption key is unobtainable, that is, the encrypted data cloud provider also has no way to restore or obtain. But I always think everyone can understand that there is still a risk here. For example, cloud administrators, or there may be these vulnerabilities in cloud technology, its security is still somewhat controversial, or there are some risks in it. So what is the third situation? I have plain text data, I have already uploaded it to the cloud. So how do I not use these data now? Or my life cycle has ended. Then I directly encrypt the cloud data. It's like my data on the cloud, I encrypt it. Then what? Delete after encryption. Some students will say, why do you still delete after encryption? Isn't it okay to delete directly? What if I didn't delete it cleanly? Then I encrypt first. If I encrypt first, then I delete it. Even if it's not cleaned up. His data is also encrypted. Obviously, some students have found a loophole. Is this encryption encrypted for all data blocks? Is it synchronous? You can't guarantee that this encryption and deletion are completely synchronized. So before encryption, has the cloud provider saved a plain text data? This is also hard to say. So for the residue of cloud data, the safest is actually pre-upload encryption. If there is no such option or function, then we can use this cloud security proxy function. For example, like Tayani Cloud. It has this security function including Alibaba Cloud, Alibaba Cloud's VIP customers. It also has cloud encryption function. If it really doesn't work, we can also manually encrypt the cloud data before deleting it, then through the cloud's encryption function. So the residue of cloud data is still this sentence. Its risk is still very high. Its risks remain very high.